Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Reliability and Security Oversight Monthly Update for November. My name is Maylee Cook. I am a Training and Outreach Specialist here, and it is my pleasure to welcome you this afternoon. We'll begin with a couple quick announcements. First, the Q4 2024 Oversight Trends Update Report is available on WECC.org. We'll go ahead and get the link to that dropped in the chat. Some minor changes were made to this edition of the report, and that is because of your feedback. So thank you, all of those who have provided that feedback. We were able to incorporate that and make some of those changes you recommended. So that is available on WECC.org. Next up, in just a few weeks, we have our Board of Directors and associated meetings that will be held on December 10th and 11th and in a hybrid format, and we have the link to that also in the chat for you. Our antitrust policy. All WECC meetings are conducted in accordance with the WECC antitrust policy and NERC antitrust compliance guidelines. All participants must comply with the policy and guidelines. This meeting is public. Confidential or proprietary information should not be discussed in open session. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted publicly. By participating, you give your consent for your name, voice, image, and likeness to be included in that recording. WECC strives to ensure the information presented today is accurate and reflects the views of WECC. However, all interpretations and positions are subject to change. If you have any questions, please contact WECC's legal counsel. We would love to have your questions, answer your questions today. You can send those via the chat feature to WECC meetings, or you can use the raise hand and we will call on you to ask your question aloud. We have a few items on the agenda today. We'll start with a NERC supplemental filing report from Steve Noess, followed by a cold weather update and standards feedback team update from Curtis Cruz, and an update on the inverter-based registration initiative. We've got something, there was not enough R's in that sentence. Inverter-based resources registration initiative from Mark Rogers. So we'll turn it over to you, Steve.
Great, thanks, Maylee. Hey, everybody. Good to be with you this afternoon. I want to give it a brief update on NERC's supplemental filing to its 5-year performance assessment that was originally filed in July of 2024. The ERO has an obligation to submit that to FERC every 5 years to assess its ongoing performance. And based on a technical conference and a lot of other developments throughout the last couple of years in terms of identifying opportunities to enhance processes related to both standards development and the compliance monitoring and enforcement program, they've decided to submit a supplemental filing. They submitted that on November 8th of this year to FERC, supplemental filing to their 5-year performance assessment. And there's a couple of key items that are in that filing that are pending. FERC has opened up a 14-day comment period to that I just wanted to cover here today, recognizing that a lot of the details are yet to come because we're really frankly waiting on what FERC will say about that in any final ruling on the performance assessment, because as they do when they approve a standard or when they approve rules of procedure changes or when they approve other process changes that are filed that affect the enterprise work, they often have discussion in their orders that impacts some of the final details of that. But if you go to the next slide, just to kind of have a highlight of the 3 areas here that I wanted to talk about a little bit, and then happy to take questions, recognizing that in many cases the answer will be yet to be developed. But this is pretty exciting. It represents NERC trying to align some process improvement to one of its main focus areas, which is agility, being more nimble and agile, and recognizing that we are starting. We long have, but we are really starting to develop more and more standards that are entering into technical areas that we've not historically had standards address. Some of them are highly technical in nature. Grid transformation is also changing the number of participants that will be required to register and be subject to our standards. And there's a recognition that we want standards to be written with an eye toward reliability and security, but there's this constant tension with compliance certainty, and so that has impacted over time the standards development timeliness of projects, and so this first of three areas that NERC is suggesting process enhancement is related to standards development. And they think all three of these process improvements, by the way, can occur within our existing constructs, within the existing rules of procedure. But they're proposing that we develop a process in the standards development construct to account for the possibility of an abeyance period for potential noncompliance and enforcement, particularly for new standards that come into effect. And what I think, what they're contemplating with this abeyance period is that a standard would go into effect and then have this timeline that's contemplated during the standards development process and included within the compliance monitoring section of the standard, which is not part of the requirements, but it's one of the portions of a reliability standard that ultimately exists with the standard. They would account for a period after the effective date until some other period that we would essentially forego pursuing noncompliance and enforcement. Now, what does that look like exactly? I think that's a case where, ultimately, depending upon what the commission rules and how we develop our process, it could go, one of a couple of different ways. But I think we contemplate that we would expect a good faith implementation from entities. And so long as that good faith implementation occurred, we would identify where we see there's a potential noncompliance for our own record keeping so that we could provide feedback into the standards, but we wouldn't pursue it through our channel. So it wouldn't be pursued through the enforcement mechanism. And so some questions come up about that, like, would we still expect self-reports? What about self-logging? Kind of all those things. And, I think in spirit, we'd contemplate some level of understanding of where there's trouble meeting compliance during that abeyance period, because part of the very point for suggesting a potential abeyance period is to gather information about effectiveness of implementing the requirement during that abeyance period so that we can provide feedback to quickly modify the standard on the backside should we need to. But again, those are just kind of how I see it. And a lot more will need to come from that after FERC action. I'm hopeful that it's something that's amenable to FERC. Hopefully it sounds exciting to all of you, but certainly we'll keep close as we hear more. And we'll be collaborating amongst the ERO enterprise, well, the regions and NERC, and having feedback with stakeholders as well, in particular here in the Western Interconnection with the WECC. But that's an exciting development and something that I think is full of possibilities for us to develop going forward. The second one that I'll hit on is related to compliance monitoring and enforcement program processing. And this one is centered around enforcement of minimal risk issues that would be compliance exceptions in particular. And so certainly we have a desire in the ERO enterprise to focus our time and energy on the highest risk activities. But as the number of entities that are registered continues to grow, as the number of standards that are applicable to entities has continued to expand into other areas, and then, notably as the capability of registered entities has improved over time to be much, much more effective at self-identifying and self-reporting noncompliances, we have a large number of open enforcement actions that are related to minimal risk issues that will be processed and pursued as compliance exceptions. And there's a number of things that we do to work with entities to understand all of the details that we need to submit that ultimately to NERC and to FERC for disposition as a compliance exception. But we're looking at trying to make that even more efficient, in particular for those minimal risk issues, by trying to come up with a little bit more standardization and briefer types of information that we would put in the template to pursue those minimal risk issues. So we think that can help streamline things. We're pretty excited about this as well. These are some discussions that have been underway really heavily amongst the regions and NERC and throughout 2024. And the intent of that is to help get through this caseload for minimal risk issues much quicker than we already are. Now, one thing I'll say in the Western Interconnection that I'm really happy about is a lot of action has been occurring amongst our enforcement team at WECC and a number of entities that are registered with WECC to try to understand what and how we use information to process compliance exceptions. So anecdotally, we've already seen a slight improvement in our capability to process compliance exceptions faster, especially for some of the newer self-reports that have been coming in because of the benefit of this interaction that's occurred. But this, I think, takes it to another level. And assuming again that this gets approved by the commission, we would look forward to having an even greater streamlined way of going through our compliance exceptions. And the third one is really just related to the others, and we want to have increased and enhanced data collection so that we can identify where there's struggle points to understand potentially implementation of reliability standards, where we see trends, and that can go both ways, where we see trends of common pitfalls that people have in terms of complying with the standard, or perhaps there's ways that we didn't intend when the standard was written, that we're seeing a pattern that we could provide as a feedback into a standards enhancement going forward. And then even, cases from the field where we have technical compliance with the standard, but ineffective approaches relative to what the purpose of the standard is. And that would be within that spectrum as well. But really just to try to increase the capability that we have to be agile and reflective on an iterative basis to make sure that the standards development process is keeping up with the reality of implementation in the field. So mainly that's what I had as a brief update. I think it's exciting, something for people to watch. The filings are publicly available both on the NERC website and through FERC if you know how to access those filings. But it's something to watch and see in anticipation for when they give response ultimately to the 5-year performance assessment. I'm happy to take any questions if there are any offhand or comments.
Yeah, we've had a couple come in.
All right, great.
First off, do you know if any standards or projects have been flagged for the non-compliance abeyance period?
Yeah, so right now they'd be looking at the slate of projects that they have in progress. As we contemplate this abeyance period right now, it's something that will be done as part of standards development. So I think it would be fair to say that any standard that is under development at the time this would go into effect or be approved by FERC would be subject to be considered for that. I think that's a conversation that best would occur amongst the standards drafting teams themselves, and as part of the process through standards development to have that interaction and input from the ballot body. But it wouldn't, as I know it, apply to something that's already approved and in effect, because part of what we're proposing is that we would include this within the compliance monitoring section of the newly developed standard as part of the filing package to FERC.
Okay. Where can we participate in FERC's comment period on this, and when does the 14-day comment period close?
The filing occurred on November 8th, and I do not have at my fingertips when they posted it for 14-day comment. I believe it was shortly thereafter. So we should still be within the 14-day period, but I would expect that it would close soon. That would be on the docket. Perhaps we can help to find a link to that. Now, I do know, just as a matter of fact, that a lot of representative trade organizations follow this closely. And so I would expect that a number of those organizations that represent the various trades from public power to IOUs to NRECA, et cetera. Of course, there's much more than I can are following that, and so that might be a way to engage. But yeah, that would be through the FERC docket on the FERC.gov website.
Thank you. And if we can grab that link, I'll drop it in the chat in just a moment. We did have a couple more come in. Let's see. Based on the recent WECC trends report, have you noticed that the PNC backlog is going down? This is in relation to the comment that WECC is noticing improvement in processing time for CEs.
Yeah, so we focused a lot on how we do our work within the caseload. And so we've built a heavy capacity this year. And I do have to thank, the interest and participation by industry participants, especially for the newer non-compliances. Like I said, we've seen some trending where the amount of information that we've had to go back and request additional RFIs has reduced slightly. And so on that basis alone, there's been some efficiencies gained in processing some of those for those folks that have had that interaction and training for us. We're going to continue doing those. But then also, like I said, we've enhanced our capacity internally through our infrastructure. It's too early to tell where we're at, like when and where we'll be at a sustained position. But the last couple of months, we've been able to process more than we've taken in. So I'm hopeful that that's a trend that we'll be able to continue. But right now, the number of incoming non-compliances, is somewhere between 30 and 50 per month. And we're for the last couple of months processing out a couple more than that. So we're trending positively, but there's still a long way to go. And so I'm hopeful that this change in particular with the supplemental filing can take a relatively large dent out of the processing for some of those that are remaining.
Thank you. Okay, couple more. Thank you for this update. There is very positive and super exciting where this goes. Question on whether NERC will also be extending this to FFT lower risk issues. Also, would the abeyance period be inclusive of existing standards that may change in the future, not just new standards? That was maybe two questions in one, but.
Yeah, that's fine. I think right now the focus is on the compliance exceptions, but that represents probably the biggest percentage of open potential non-compliances that we have. And that's in part because of the work that we do to provide those compliance exceptions up. Those specifically are not included, as a future consideration in the same way. So at this time, the focus is compliance exceptions. Let's take it one step at a time, and if we get some success with that, then I'd say anything's on the table. But the focus of this would be on compliance exceptions, not on FFTs. The second one, yeah, look, without speaking with certainty about what it will be, because like I said, I think there needs to be some future development of the actual process. I think the key is that there's got to be some standards development process open. So to the extent we take an existing standard and we modify it to add a provision or to otherwise change it through the standards development process, I would think that it would be fair to consider whether it could or should be subject to that abeyance period, subject to its approval ultimately by FERC.
Okay. In regards to the robust data collection to report on trends, themes, and recommendations, would this include a feedback loop on how effective the standards are in meeting their compliance objectives? Is the idea to feed this into the standards development process?
Yes, yeah. So all of the above, both feedback from what we learn from compliance exceptions and how that might feed into trending that we see where there's a common fall down of some minimal risk issue that could be a feedback to standards. And then also just how entities are reacting to emerging trends and the impact that that has on their implementation. So absolutely, I think the goal here is to provide a more nimble responsiveness and feedback loop to standards development.
Okay, thank you so much, Steve. Oh, I almost said we were done, but one just came in. Is it correct that as part of this streamlined CE process, WECC will only be looking at 10 to 15% of the submitted CEs?
No, I think that's something separate, and I think you might be referring more to, well, without knowing for certainty, this is separate from like what and how we would sample, like from the self-log, for example. This is more generally for all CEs. The amount of time and paperwork and processing that we do today is is what we're trying to reduce, so that as a general matter, the templates that we use to process them through NERC and FERC will be shorter, quicker, more streamlined, and that would apply to all the CEs. So hopefully that answers that question, but I'll just end it by saying I think we're talking. I think that's a separate issue
Right.
than what's at hand here with regard to streamlining the CE process.
Okay, we also did get a question about any thoughts on how these changes might impact the self-logging process. Does this diminish the value for an entity to sign up for self-logging?
I don't think so, for a couple of reasons. So one, we already see today that we're able to process self-logs faster on average than we're able to process self-reported compliance exceptions. And that's because people that are in self-logging have gone through a process with us where we've vetted their ability and capability to present information to us in a way that we can process even quicker. So yeah, while it's true that we're going to try to even streamline further templates for all CEs, I still see the advantage for self-logged entities to be able to take advantage of that even more. And then second, I think there's a reputational benefit for your company to be part of self-logging. So I don't see that as going away. Self-logging represents in some respects an achievement within your organization of your capability to identify and mitigate risk and non-compliance, and it recognizes an acknowledgement by WECC that you've met that standard. So, my hope is that we are able to continue to build that program out and to provide value to those of you that are in it as something to give assurances, to your executive teams that you're at a level of capability that's recognized by WECC in terms of your internal compliance program capabilities.
Okay, thank you, Steve. I think that ends the questions for now. We appreciate your update.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Okay, great. We'll go ahead and turn the time over to Curtis Cruz now.
Yeah, thank you. And that was a great discussion, Steve. Really appreciate that. Part of my update is about a standards feedback team, and that order, that filing was part of our discussion this week. So we're excited for it as well internally here at WECC, some of the folks that have to deal with standards. I'm a cheap substitute for Donovan this month, but we wanted to say that we have generally agreed with all the standards that are coming through. One of the key things that we always look for is improvements and clarity in the language. So please, as you go through standards and provide comments, don't just say you don't like the rock. Try to provide what that rock should look like in the best way possible. That's very good and very useful to the drafting teams that are out there. And we try to do the same as well internal to WECC. But we continue to look at the feedback efforts, and we want to keep in tune with all the standards that are coming down to play. They're coming down the pike here. There are a lot of them. The cold weather one, EOP 12-2 updates to 12-3. It did fail. I am a drafting team member of that particular project. I was excited that it failed by just enough that it did fail. It sounds kind of weird, but that means we came close to hitting the mark on the meeting the FERC directives and meeting the expectations of the industry. There's 288 pages worth of comments on that EOP 12-3. Went through every one of them. We had a team meeting last week and a technical conference last week on cold weather. And we've tried to address every one of those comments as best as we can through the lens of the FERC directives and ensuring that we're going to be fair and agile in respect to what's called out in those standards. I think we're due to submit that back to the industry December 3rd. A lot of discussion around ECWT. I just got off WICF New Standards Implementation Group discussion about ECWT. We're adding some additional language within the standard, or at least we're considering some at this point. Can't say it'll get to the finish line, but hopefully it will. We've added some additional information and technical rationale. We've added some additional information in the ECWT calculation document as well. Specifically around missing data. We understand as the ERO enterprise, that's not always going to be controllable by you. So we're trying to address that as best as we can without upsetting the apple cart, so to speak. A lot of discussions around constraints. You'll see some language in attachment 1 that addresses a lot of the constraints issues that have been brought up. Thank you for those that provided some discrete examples. That's helpful for the drafting team. We look forward to addressing that even more. Implementation plan didn't have a whole lot of comments on that, but there were a few in there, a few concerns. I think the key to that is understanding the FERC urgency associated with the cold weather standards that's been out there. If you read the June 27th order that FERC had, they were pretty explicit on their need, and that's why they're wanting that standard presented to them by March 27th, 2025. There's another thing that did come out on cold weather that I think you should be aware of. If you're not, during one of the approvals by FERC, they talked about getting some additional data out there. NERC put together a data 1600 request, went out this summer for a bunch of comments. They just re-released it just this week. Hopefully I put it in the chat with some links about the proposed data requests, some of the red lines that were based on some of the comments, a mock data set and responses to those comments. I think that has to be approved by the board, the NERC board conditionally. Right now they're looking for May 15th of next year and being able to adjust that by June 15th of 2025, I should say. So be ready for that. I'm sure the NERC board will take a look at that probably under December meeting, I would suspect, and we'll see if that does get passed. We'll provide that information to you if that does get passed. And I think that's about it. I will say, I really do appreciate all the good comments. If you do have questions about EOP 12, for sure, don't hesitate to throw them my way. I work with a bunch of people behind the scenes on delivering answers to those, but certainly we encourage questions now before we ever get into final words of the standard. But thank you again for your participation. And that's all I had, Maylee. I think Mark, you're up next. Oh,
I actually have a question for you first.
Oh, no. Go ahead.
It says, is WECC still sending out guided self-certifications to entities for EOP 12?
I believe we've sent several for that standard, and I know some for EOP 11-2. I'm not directly involved with those sending out. I hear that information, but I can get that to you pretty quick. If Deb's on the line, I'll ping her. I know we sent out information, self-certifications to about 90 people that were very related to EOP 11, R7, and R8, which is effectively now EOP 12. The cold weather plan and some of the training associated with that. It goes back to the cold weather strategy that we have put together to address the risk. I've got a message behind the scenes here that said they're not expecting any more at this point, but that can always change. I'll say that. Yeah. I know we presented at the RNS workshop some visits. We're working with a few entities with that combined group going out to do some site visits. So we'll try to ramp that program up as needed as well. But it looks exciting in many ways. So thank you.
Okay. I also have a note that your link did not work. Could you try dropping those in the chat?
Yeah. Which link, I guess? The proposed data request stuff?
Yeah, the proposed data request set. Your one to the NERC filing did work, but the other one. So okay.
I'll see what I can do there in a minute.
Thank you.
You bet.
Appreciate it. We'll turn the time over now to Mark Rogers.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming today. I'd like to share a little bit of IBR registration update. As many of you know, and I hope you were able to see it, on November 13th, NERC and the regions put on a webinar for about 2 hours, and we had quite a large turnout. And we described what was coming up starting December 2nd, which is the kickoff. So we're really talking about when the rubber meets the road here. So we're going to start sending out RFIs to the identified entities that we got from the TOs and BAs. So what I want to talk about for a few minutes today is WECC's approach. And we're going to have a small team that's going to start working on this. And what we plan to do is December 2nd will be the first go around when we send out, and we're going to send these out in batches because we have in the WECC region, we have 335 identified assets. So that's assets. So we're working on trying to validate who's actually new and who's currently NCR registrations that are going to have Cat 2s. So with that being said, we'll send out RFIs, and for those folks who already have an NCR number and you're going to be adding your Cat 2, you'll kind of fall in one bucket that we'll be doing some outreach with you and contacting you. And because you already know the process, you understand NERC, you understand the WECC region, and then there's the group who are brand new and have not interacted with NERC or WECC. The registration process for those folks really is registering, but at this point in time, there won't be any standards or requirements applicable to that yet. So it's going to look like more of outreach, because we want folks to understand those new entities, who NERC is, who WECC is, and so we'll be working on outreach for those folks. So we're looking forward to having the conversations with you and working with you on your Cat 2 registrations, and more to come after this. So like I said, December 2nd really puts the rubber to the road, and we'll start contacting everybody. That's all I had today, Maylee.
Thank you, Mark. Let me check if there are any questions coming in. We were able to confirm the close period of that comment, closed your time of that comment period. It is 5 p.m. Eastern tomorrow, 11/22. So I'm not seeing any questions, but I do have some little dots coming up on my screen. Give me just a moment. Yeah. Megan, could you promote Angie so she can share with the group? Sorry, Angie, I'm putting you on the spot. We're going to add you as a presenter here.
So, did you just want me to speak to it?
Yes, if you could speak to the self-certification question.
Right. So hopefully you can hear me okay. The ELP 12 self-certification activities that we've been doing, they're not guided self-certifications in the same way that we've done them in the past. They do have some controls questions attached to them. But the short answer is yes, we are sending them out again, and we'll continue to. So just as a heads up, that activity hasn't ended per se.
All right. Thank you, Angie. Appreciate you hopping on unexpectedly. Thank you. And I am not seeing any other questions at this moment. So thank you to all our presenters, Steve, Mark, and Curtis, for presenting those updates today. We had an excellent discussion, so thank you very much. We'll go ahead and wrap up early. We will have one more of these before the end of the year. That will be on December 19th, 2 p.m. Mountain. We will see you next month.